Buonasera. Okay, what is a bestiary for? A che cosa serve un bestiario? So, a bestiary, as you know, is a book of animals, and it's a description of and stories about animals in the real world, or so it seems. It has its roots in antiquity, in the work of Plinio il Vecchio, the natural history, and also in a 2nd century text called the Physiologus, a didactic Christian text. It flourished in Europe, particularly in France and England in the Middle Ages, and sometimes they were beautifully illustrated. So this is from a bestiary created in England, in southern England, in around the year 1200. It's now in the University of Aberdeen in Scotland, and it shows Adam naming the animals. Naming is a way of knowing in the world, and telling stories of how it is or how it should be. This is from the same bestiary. This is a panther. It's the animal in blue. And I'm going to share a bit of the text that goes with this in the original bestiary. It goes like this. There is an animal called the panther, multicolored and very beautiful, and extremely gentle. From its mouth comes a sweet odor, as if it were a mixture of every perfume. When other animals hear its voice, they follow it, because the sweetness of its scent attracts them. Only the dragon, hearing its voice, is seized by fear and flees into caves beneath the earth. There, unable to bear the scent, the dragon grows numbed and motionless as if dead. Thus our Lord Jesus Christ, the true panther, descending from heaven, snatched us from the power of death and the devil. So medieval bestiaries remind us how beautiful and strange some of the products of the human imagination can be. And these works also exist on the boundaries between truth, allegory, and error. And in this, I think they are a distant mirror of our own times. By the turn of the 19th century, philosophers in Europe were coming around to the idea that the Earth was not thousands, a few thousand, but many millions of years old. And this was, of course, contrary to Christian doctrine. Here you're seeing a picture of Sycamore Point on the east coast of Scotland. In 1788, the geologist James Hutton visited and identified what we would now call an angular unconformity. This is where rocks of two different ages are right up against each other. And it's evidence that the time frame on which we humans have our being is very short compared to the almost unimaginably long time frame of the Earth itself. The deep past is full of very strange things. In the generation after Hutton, fossil hunters began to discover more and more evidence that there were animals stranger than anything in a medieval bestiary that had existed sometime in the past. So, I've gone too far. This is Mary Anning. In 1811, she discovered the skeleton of an ichthyosaur, a kind of marine reptile that lived in the global ocean from 250 million to around 90 million years ago. It's just one of the things she discovered. And it astonished her contemporaries. This is a cartoon which was published in 1830, and it shows that at the time that people were beginning to think, well, really, where does humanity fit in this huge story in deep time? And I'm going to read you what it says at the bottom. The professor is the ichthyosaur. He is saying, you will see at once that the skull before us, that human skull, the skull before us belonged to one of the lower order of animals. Its teeth are very insignificant. The power of its jaws is trifling, and it seems to be wonderful how such a small creature could have existed at all. So just a year after this cartoon was drawn, Charles Darwin embarked on a 5-year voyage on HMS Beagle, shown here in Patagonia, And he began to piece together what became known as the theory of natural selection. And this gave rise to the idea that evolution without divine intervention could account for the life we see around us. So, bestiaries have continued all this time. Leonardo da Vinci created one, apparently just for his own amusement. He drew his own pictures, of course. And when I made one, I was very fortunate to have the wonderful artist Roberto Abbiati do the illustrations for this edition. And it's a book of amazing animals, but it's written in the light of the scientific revolution, as far as I can. I tried to keep the form of the medieval bestiary, but the thinking of some of the great biologists informs the book. So one observation is that nothing in the living world makes sense except in the light of evolution. Another is that evolution is much more clever than you are, and to this I added that evolution has a stranger imagination than you do. This is an example. It's a jumping spider. So, something very relevant here, I think, is an observation by the Nobel Prize-winning physicist Richard Feynman, who said that our imagination is stretched to the utmost, not as in fiction, to imagine things which are not really there, but just to comprehend the things which really are there. Here's a few of them. These are tree hoppers. And this was very much my experience writing the bestiary. Even now, we're only just beginning to understand and imagine the living world around us. So, we seem to be a long way from the medieval bestiary. There are ways in which the world we find ourselves, though, is a little like a bestiary because it's becoming an allegory of ourselves. We're living in an epoch that some call the Anthropocene, in which humans are a main driver of change on Earth, and which animals live and die is increasingly shaped by our decisions, our choices, our neglect. The rate at which other animals are going extinct is at least hundreds of times and maybe thousands of times faster than any time in many millions of years, as far as we can tell, certainly vastly exceeding the background rate. And there's a reminder of some of the fires in the Amazon. So when we create a living world that reflects our values, we are living in this allegory. What kind of creatures are in the bestiary that we now inhabit? Well, most of them are livestock. Apart from humans, it's the things we eat. Only around 4% is not livestock. That's about 2% marine mammals, 2% wild mammals on the land. So that's our bestiary, that's where we live. Of course, there are some animals that resist and find their own way. This is a nest. I'm sorry the photograph is not very clear, but it's a nest made out of anti-bird spikes by a magpie, Gatsa. So they are holding on there and existing in a very difficult environment. And here, if we have it, it's going to be, this is zooplankton, so very near the base of the food chain in the global ocean. These little creatures are incredibly important to the ecosystems of the oceans, but increasingly, they're encountering problems with plastic, as you can see in this footage by the plankton scientist Richard Kirby. This is also part of our bestiary. So it's copyright Richard Kirby. Okay, so what about monsters? So in medieval bestiaries, we tend to think they're full of monsters. In fact, most of the animals in a medieval bestiary were real animals, even if the behavior was not quite real, like that panther maybe not blue. But it was a real animal, still is. But there were also monsters in medieval bestiaries, and here's an example. This is a bonacon. It was said to resemble, it had the mane of a horse, and the body of a bull, but its horns were pointing the wrong way, so it couldn't fight. And instead, it had a flamethrower coming out of its bottom, and it could project dung for about 3 furlongs, maybe 600 meters. And this dung, this excrement, would burn anything that was chasing after it. That's some kind of bullshit, right? So, and what about monsters today? So in 1998, the climate scientist Wally Broecker observed that the climate system is an angry beast, and we are poking it with sticks. And he wasn't wrong. Every year, on average, the global climate is getting hotter. So I've just been seeing earlier today, it looks like the hottest ever temperature recorded in the southern hemisphere, nearly 52 degrees centigrade, has been measured in Western Australia. And one of the consequences of a hotter planet is more fires. This image is Flammigenitus, Pyrocumulonimbus, Pyro-CB, and it's created by a giant firestorm. Conditions like this occurred over the city of Fort McMurray in the province of Alberta in northern Canada, which is one of the centers for the highly carbon-intensive extraction of oil and gas, and destroyed the entire city in a matter of a few hours. So, as the author John Vaillant has recently written in a prize-winning book called Fire Weather, this is not planet Earth as we found it. This is a new place, a fire planet we have made, with an atmosphere more conducive to combustion than at any time in the past 3 million years. So the monsters aroused by climate change are far from the only ones. Some of the most dangerous are dormant inside almost every human being, and they're awakened mostly by fear and ignorance about other people. So I chose as an epigraph to my book a line from the French humanist Michel de Montaigne, who wrote that the greatest malady of our being is to despise ourselves. Montaigne was writing during the French Wars of Religion in the last 3 decades of the 16th century. Historians estimate that between 10 and 20% of the population of France died as a result of those wars. So his message is obviously as relevant as ever in our times. And perhaps I think we can clarify, or I'd like to clarify as far as I can what he said. Our greatest malady is to despise our being or the being of others. Okay, slight change here. Oh, I'm out of time, my goodness. I'm going behind time. So this photo was taken in just 70 years ago next month. It's the structure of DNA. This is part of an enormous change in biological thinking, and we're moving very fast. I think some of the dangers here are when we start to regard life as like computer code and the brain as a computer. So the billionaire technologist, Mark Andreessen, investor, is an advocate of what he calls effective accelerationism. This aims, in his words, to follow the will of the universe, and it has no particular allegiance to the biological substrate of life. But life is not hardware, the brain's not a computer. I'd like to go with a new book from the science writer Philip Ball, who offers, I think, a better frame. And he says, looking to an account of the genome for how life works is rather like looking to a dictionary to understand how literature works. We need to think differently. How do we think about our possible futures? The physicist Carlo Rovelli, who's recently explored the concept of white holes, in which concepts such as time have a very different meaning. One of the things he's said in a recent book is that we have to constantly, as scientists, imagine in new ways. And I'm going to finish I'll go ahead because I'm out of time. I'm going to finish with a beautiful image here, one of the most beautiful I know from a medieval bestiary. It's a peridexion tree. It's a magical tree that keeps the birds. And if we ask what a bestiary is for, my answer is it is to grow and guard and protect the most beautiful fruits of the human imagination.